June 1, 1918. Belleau Wood, France. General Jean de Goude of the French XXI Corps looked at his maps and at the reports coming in from the front and told his staff something that captured the desperation of the moment with brutal honesty. Paris was 40 miles away. The German spring offensive that had begun in March had pushed the Allied lines back further and faster than anything seen since 1914. The French army that had mutinied in 1917 was still fragile. The British army was desperately thin. And the German forces that had broken through the lines at Chemin des Dames and were now pressing toward the Marne River had the momentum and the confidence of men who believed they were finally going to win the war that had been grinding for 4 years. Into this situation came the Americans. The 4th Marine Brigade, part of the 2nd Infantry Division, had been rushed to the Marne sector to help stop the German advance. The Marines who arrived at the front on June 1st were unlike anything the French and British soldiers who had been fighting since 1914 had encountered. They were physically large by the standards of European armies. They were confident with the specific confidence of men who had not yet experienced what the Western Front did to confidence. They were armed with rifles and trained in marksmanship to a standard that the trench warfare of the previous 4 years had largely made irrelevant, but that the open warfare conditions of the German spring offensive had made urgently necessary again. And they were completely unaware of what they were walking into. The stream of French soldiers moving in the opposite direction, retreating from the German advance, told the Marines what the tactical situation was more clearly than any briefing. One French officer who encountered the Marine column moving toward the front reportedly told the Marine commander to turn around, that the Germans were too strong, that the position was lost. The Marine commander's response has been disputed in its exact wording ever since, but the sentiment is not disputed. He said they were going forward. The position that the 4th Marine Brigade was ordered to hold ran through Belleau Wood, a hunting preserve of approximately 1 square kilometre that they, Germans, had turned into one of the most formidable defensive positions on the Western Front. The wood was composed of mature trees with dense undergrowth and large boulders that the German defenders had used to construct machine gun positions that were essentially invisible from the outside and nearly impregnable to direct assault. The German defenders who held Belleau Wood were veterans of 4 years of Western Front warfare. They understood machine guns and defensive positions and fields of fire with the accumulated professional knowledge of men who had been killing Allied soldiers since 1914. The positions they had built in Belleau Wood were designed to destroy precisely the kind of frontal assault that the American tactical doctrine of the era prescribed. The frontal assault was what the Marine commanders ordered. June 6, 1918, the day of the first major Marine assault on Belleau Wood, is one of the bloodiest days in the history of the United States Marine Corps. Marines of the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments advanced across open wheat fields toward the wood under fire from the German machine gun positions. They had not been able to adequately reconnoiter. The wheat was waist-high and provided no cover from the machine gun fire that swept the fields from multiple angles simultaneously. Marines died by the hundreds in the wheat fields. The marksmanship training that had made them effective riflemen was irrelevant against machine gun positions. They could not see clearly enough to engage accurately. The tactical doctrine that called for them to advance in waves was perfectly matched to the defensive doctrine that called for machine gun fire to sweep advancing infantry in waves. They kept advancing. Gunnery Sergeant Dan Daly, who had already won 2 medals of honor in previous service, is alleged to have turned to his men at the edge of the wheat field and said the words that became the most famous utterance in Marine Corps history: "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" The historical accuracy of the exact words is uncertain. What is certain is that Daly advanced and his men followed him into the wheat fields toward the German positions. The casualty figures from June 6 were staggering by any standard. The Marine Brigade suffered 1,087 casualties in a single day, more than the entire Marine Corps had suffered in any previous engagement in its history. The assault had not taken Belleau Wood. It had also not stopped. The battle that followed over the next 3 weeks was a grinding campaign of small unit assaults, each one taking a portion of the wood, each one costing lives, each one requiring the next assault because the positions taken were contested and the positions ahead were still held. The Germans who faced the Marines in Belleau Wood had encountered American soldiers before, in the earlier battles of 1918 where American units had been introduced to the front in support roles. They had not encountered the Marines, and their intelligence reports on the new opponents they were facing in the wood reflected a growing professional respect that was not something German intelligence offered easily. The specific Marine quality that distinguished the fighting in Belleau Wood from previous Allied assaults was the refusal to accept that a position was too strongly held to be taken. The French army that had been fighting since 1914 had developed a sophisticated understanding of what could and could not be taken against prepared German defenses, an understanding that was fundamentally sound in its tactical assessment and that reflected the accumulated learning of 4 years of exactly the kind of assault that Belleau Wood required. The Marines did not have that understanding. They had not been on the Western Front for 4 years. They had not learned that some positions could not be taken by frontal assault. They had not developed the institutional caution that the French Army's experience had produced. They had their training, their rifles, their marksmanship, and the specific Marine Corps culture that treated the word impossible as a challenge rather than an assessment. They kept attacking. The German command reports from Belleau Wood during the 3 weeks of fighting reflect the same trajectory that the intelligence reports from other battles involving fresh American troops had reflected. Initial assessment of the Americans as aggressive but tactically naive. Progressive recognition that the aggressiveness was not diminishing with casualties as the German tactical doctrine assumed it would. Final assessment that the Marines in particular represented a qualitatively different kind of opponent than anything the German army had faced since the opening months of the war. The specific German report that entered Marine Corps mythology identified the Marines as Teufelshunde, devil dogs, a designation that the Marine Corps adopted as a nickname and has used ever since. The authenticity of the specific document has been questioned by historians, but the attitude it expressed was genuine. The German soldiers who fought in Belleau Wood were afraid of the Marines in a way that their previous experience of Allied infantry had not produced. The Marines were afraid too. They were not the cartoon warriors of popular mythology, immune to fear and indifferent to casualties. They were young men in their 20s who watched their friends die in the wheat fields and in the wood and who continued to advance not because they were unafraid but because the Marine Corps culture that surrounded them did not permit the expression of fear as a reason to stop. Corporal Leo Smith of the 6th Marine Regiment wrote home to his family in September 1918, after Belleau Wood was over, in a letter that was reviewed by the military censors and preserved in family records for decades. "I cannot tell you what it was like," Smith wrote. "I can tell you that the men who went forward in those fields were the bravest men I have ever known or ever will know. I can tell you that I was afraid every minute and that I went forward anyway and that going forward was the only thing I was certain of when everything else was uncertain. That is what being a Marine means. Not the absence of fear. The going forward." The wood was declared secured on June 26, 1918, after 26 days of fighting. The Marine Brigade had suffered approximately 5,200 casualties in the month of fighting around Belleau Wood, including the surrounding engagements at Bresches and Hill 142 and the various subsidiary actions that accompanied the main battle. The French government renamed Belleau Wood the Bois de la Brigade de Marine, the Wood of the Marine Brigade, in recognition of what the Americans had done there. The name on the official French maps has been Bois de la Brigade de Marine ever since. The Battle of Belleau Wood was not a turning point of the First World War in the strategic sense. The German spring offensive was already running out of momentum when the Marines arrived on the Marne. The German army that had pushed 50 miles in 3 months did not have the logistics to sustain the advance regardless of what happened at Belleau Wood. The war was decided by forces and factors that operated at a scale far above the single brigade that fought in a 1 square kilometre wood in June 1918. What Belleau Wood decided was something smaller and more specific and in some ways more important. It decided the reputation of the United States Marine Corps in the military culture of Europe. It decided how the German army would approach subsequent engagements with American troops in the final months of the war. And it decided, for the generation of Marines who survived it, what it meant to be a Marine. The surviving Marines who came home from France in 1919 carried Belleau Wood inside them in the way that formative experiences are carried, as the reference point against which all subsequent challenges were measured. The Marine Corps culture that produced Guadalcanal and Tarawa and Iwo Jima and Chosin and Fallujah was shaped in significant part by what happened in Belleau Wood in June 1918, by the institutional understanding that the Marine Corps had established in that wood that it would attack positions that other forces considered unassailable and that it would keep attacking until those positions were taken. That understanding has a cost. The 1,087 casualties on June 6, 1918 alone represent the cost in its most immediate form, the lives of young men who advanced across wheat fields into machine gun fire because their culture and their orders said to advance and they were Marines and they advanced. It has a consequence as well. The consequence is the reputation that the Marine Corps earned in Belleau Wood and has maintained ever since, the reputation of a military force that will attack regardless of the odds and will keep attacking regardless of the cost until the objective is taken. The German army that called them devil dogs was paying them the highest compliment available in the professional military culture of the First World War era, the compliment of genuine fear. The Marines had earned it. In the wheat fields and in the wood, they had earned it. Belleau Wood stands today in northern France, preserved as an American war memorial. The wheat fields that cost so many Marines their lives on June 6, 1918 are still there, still growing wheat in summer, still looking nothing like a killing ground when the sun is shining and the stalks are tall. The memorial at the edge of the wood is simple. It lists the units. It gives the dates. It says what happened in the language that military memorials use, which is the language of fact without the full weight of what the facts represent. The full weight is carried by the Marine Corps, in every generation that has trained in the shadow of what happened in Belleau Wood, in every officer who has read the casualty reports from June 6th and understood what they mean, in every recruit who has been told what it means to be a Marine and has had Belleau Wood offered as the answer. It means this. When the French soldiers were retreating and the German positions were prepared and the tactical situation said that the assault was not survivable, the Marines went forward. Come on, you sons of bitches. Do you want to live forever? They did not want to live forever. They wanted to take the wood. They took it.